This is the new 2025 Honda Civic Hybrid, and it's surprisingly good at just about everything. Technology, features, pricing, practicality, fuel economy, of course, and even acceleration. In fact, it may just be the very best all-around Honda Civic you can buy. Today, I'm going to review the new Civic Hybrid and explain, and show you all of its quirks and features. Before we get started, are you ready for your next cool car? Sell your enthusiast car on Cars and Bids. Trading in your car to dealers means you aren't getting market value for your car, leaving you with less cash for your next fun car. Just look at our recent sales of these cool cars compared to current trade-in value. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is a trade-in offer, and this was the Cars and Bids result. This is the trade-in offer, and this is the Cars and Bids result. Get started now on carsandbids.com. Sell on Cars and Bids and join the best community to sell your enthusiast car. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new Civic Hybrid, which is, of course, a hybrid version of the new Honda Civic. It has a hybrid four-cylinder engine, and it gets up to 50 miles per gallon in the city and 47 miles per gallon on the highway. Those are pretty impressive numbers. But the especially and surprisingly impressive part of this car is its performance. This hybrid four-cylinder has 200 horsepower and 233 pound-feet of torque. The horsepower figure is the same as the high-performance Honda Civic Si, and the torque figure is higher. This car has 40 more pound-feet of torque than the Civic Si. The result is the Civic Hybrid does 0 to 60 in 6.2 seconds, which actually makes it faster than the high-performance Civic Si, which is a big surprise because hybrids aren't usually known for maximizing for performance, and yet this one does a pretty good job. Now, it's worth pointing out the Civic Si is only offered with a manual transmission, and the Civic Hybrid is only offered with an automatic, and so the driving experience may not be as enjoyable, but the acceleration is still pretty impressive, especially for a car that's getting 50 miles per gallon. And of course, the Civic Hybrid has more muscle than the regular standard non-hybrid Honda Civic. That only has 150 horsepower compared to 200 here, and the Civic Hybrid, of course, also gets better fuel economy than a regular Civic. But anyway, moving inside to go over the quirks and features, and interestingly, there aren't that many, which isn't really surprising because the Civic isn't intended to be quirky or interesting. It's trying to appeal to a massive generalist car buying audience, the broadest swath possible of people, and so they don't want to try any weird or quirky touches because that might alienate some potential buyers. So it's generally pretty inoffensive and simple in here, but there are a few things worth noting. For one, the giant mesh trim on the climate vents, which goes the entire way over onto the passenger side and the center of the dashboard. It's certainly a distinctive look. The Civic's had it for a while now, and frankly, I think it's kind of cool. And I also love the little climate vent switches, which are kind of fun to move around. You can position them exactly where you want the climate vent to blow air, and they just feel fun to move and adjust. Now, speaking of fun to move and adjust, in the center console, you have a drive mode switch to change your drive mode, and when you do that, you get a fun little noise from the car confirming your drive mode change. But even more exciting than that, when you reach the end of the drive mode list, there's a rather dramatic "no, you can't do this" noise. Take a listen. And speaking of controls, the controls for the climate system in this car are pretty impressive. They're very easy to operate, very simple, nice within reach, quite intuitive, and frankly, the whole system is rather slick. It's a well set up climate control system. You're going to be using it often, so it's nice to see that it's intuitive, simple, and easy. And another control that I really like, you have your infotainment screen mounted on the top of the dashboard, but you have separate button controls for your volume. That's a dial you can twist, your previous track and next track on the stereo, which is good, and even the home screen for the infotainment is a button, a distinctive separate button rather than some on-screen control. So sort of your most frequently used basics are physical buttons or dials in the case of volume, which is nice to see. It makes this infotainment system easier to use. Now, as for the infotainment system itself, I would say that it's relatively fine. The screen is not particularly huge. The system is not great, but of course, it comes with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is how most people use infotainment systems these days, and it works fine. Again, not huge, a little far away from the driver, but it all seems to work. Now, one drawback, one complaint I do have with this infotainment screen is the reversing camera quality. As you can see, it's not particularly great, which is probably fine in an entry-level Civic model, but this, the hybrid sport touring hatchback, is like a $35,000 to $37,000 car. It's the top-of-the-line Civic, and you just want to see a slightly nicer backup camera here. But otherwise, infotainment tech is pretty good. Now, the other screen in this interior is the one in the gauge cluster, and I gotta say, it's actually pretty impressive, especially for a compact economy car like this Civic Hybrid. It's surprisingly configurable. You have two different information readouts on either side, left and right, and you can adjust them to show different things. The left side is primarily just the music you're listening to, the media, but the right side, you can have it show navigation or various pieces of car information depending on exactly what it is that you want to see. And you can really configure it to kind of fit exactly what you're looking for. And you can adjust this gauge cluster display to prioritize sort of the speed and charge readouts with dials, or to deprioritize them and instead pull up the information screens a little bit larger, which is pretty cool to see. You can kind of make choices exactly configuring the screens how you want, which isn't always the case in compact cars, even ones with gauge cluster screens, so I like to see that there. But beyond your front interior quirks and features, there's not too much to mention in this interior, although it is worth pointing out, just as a general point, the interior quality is what I would say fine. It seems to be nice and durable with good quality materials in here, and everything is laid out as you'd expect. It's all a nice, well done interior. One interesting thing is there's a wide variety of materials in this interior, from leather to various different types of plastics. You have aluminum on the shifter and this sort of odd trim in the center console. There's some piano black on the dashboard and the door panels. You have various different materials in here in a way that a lot of other vehicles typically don't do. Usually they select 2 or 3. Here you have like 9. But it works together okay. You don't really notice it all that much. And generally speaking, like in other Honda models, this interior is not super high quality upscale, but it's laid out well and it seems like it works. And next up we move on to the back seat in the Civic Hybrid, which checks the biggest box you want in a car like this, and that is there's good room back here. There's a surprisingly good amount of room for knees and hips and heads. This is a compact car, at least in theory, but it doesn't really feel so compact in back. Now, admittedly, my knees are kind of pushing against the front seat where I would have the front seat, but that means that 2 adults can fit in this car. I don't have tons of room to sit down and relax and lay out, but there is good space back here, especially for a Honda Civic. It's a big surprise and a roomy interior in back. Now, with that said, there are a few drawbacks that come to mind back here. You don't have climate vents for the rear seats. That's actually pretty common in cars like this, not to have climate vent back here, but a big miss is that you don't have any power ports for the rear seats. That's disappointing, again, especially at this price point. I could see them skipping rear power ports on the lower trim Civic models, but when you get to this price level, you want to see rear seat power ports in here. You also don't have much foot room in back for the middle seat passenger because the hump in the floor for the driveline is surprisingly large in this car. That's not a big deal. Most people with these won't be taking around 5 occupants all that frequently, but it could get a little annoying. Overall, though, I am impressed with the general feel back here and the size of this rear seat. It's impressive for a compact economy car. And next up, we move on to the cargo area in the new Civic Hybrid. Now, the Civic Hybrid, like the regular Civic, is offered as a sedan or a hatchback. This is the hatchback version, so we have a tailgate back here instead of a trunk and a cargo area. And you open it up to discover a rather interesting cargo cover situation. On the inside of the tailgate, you have a cover that's sort of built in to make sure people can't look in and see your valuables. But you also have one mounted inside inside the cargo area, and it slides out from the side, as you can see, from the driver's side over across the cargo area, which you don't normally see in most vehicles. Typically, it slides out from the center, and that's kind of an unusual, funky quirk of the Civic cargo area. Beyond the cargo cover situation, though, you gotta say it's pretty good space back here, again, especially for a compact economy car. Honda says they fit most of the hybrid componentry under the rear seat instead of under the cargo floor, and that means you get more cargo space. It doesn't intrude onto the cargo space like it does in some hybrid and electric vehicles. And of course, you can always put the rear seats down if you want even more cargo space, and you can lift up the floor and get slightly more cargo space underneath. There's not a lot of space under there, but there's a little bit more for sort of smaller items, valuables, if you don't want them rolling around in the general large size cargo area. Now, beyond all the quirks and features I just mentioned, I should point out that the Civic, not just the hybrid, but in general, has been updated and facelifted for the 25 model year. It has a new look in the front, which frankly I think looks quite a bit better than the previous Civic front end look. This new front end applies to all Civic models, and importantly for the Civic lineup, the manual transmission is gone unless you're getting the high-performance Civic Si or the even higher performance Civic Type R. Those are now the only Civic models offered with a manual transmission. The regular Civic versions that used to come with a manual, that's gone. They're automatic only for 25. But beyond all that, let's talk new Civic details, specifically new Civic Hybrid. So the 25 Civic starts around $25,500. The new Civic hatchback starts around $28,500. If you want to upgrade to a hybrid, it's going to be about $30,000 base price for a hybrid Civic sedan, and the hatchback starts around $31,000, and then pricing goes up from there. This is the top of the line sport touring model, like I said, in the $35,000 to $36,000 range. Now, the Civic Hybrid, this car is front-wheel drive only. All-wheel drive is not offered, which is different from this car's probably closest competitor, the new Toyota Prius. The new Prius is also front-wheel drive, but all-wheel drive is offered as an option. Now, speaking of the Prius, in terms of pricing, they're fairly similarly priced, the Civic Hybrid versus the Prius. But the Prius has a couple advantages, specifically its overall look. Its styling and design has been hailed as beautiful and attractive. It's certainly eye-catching and very cool compared to this car, which is a little more bland, blends in, sort of more traditional styling. The new Prius also gets better fuel economy, up to 57 miles per gallon compared to 50 here. They're both excellent, but the Prius edges out the Civic a little bit. With that said, the Civic has slightly better performance. It's quicker in terms of acceleration, and the Civic also has slightly better interior space and cargo space compared to the Prius. So there's pros and cons to both vehicles. But let's get behind the wheel and find out how the new Civic Hybrid drives. All right, driving the Civic Hybrid, the new Civic Hybrid. Now, this is a car that is not going to get a lot of car enthusiasts excited, and it's important to mention that and make that very clear. Sometimes I review these cars, people are like, that's a bad car, it's slow. And it's like, well, there are cars for every segment of the population, and a lot of people like to drive a Prius or a Honda Civic Hybrid. And if what you're looking for is a Prius or a Honda Civic Hybrid, this car actually has a pretty decent amount of positive traits and qualities. The Honda Civic is a car that is engineered for the bell curve of humanity, the large chunk of people, of generalist consumer car buyers. And as a result, it's not particularly exciting, but it's also not particularly offensive or controversial or compromised. And this car does a great job of showing that, probably better than any other Honda Civic does. That's because you combine relatively strong acceleration, particularly for an economy car like this, with excellent fuel economy. And unlike electric cars, which also make that combination, one benefit of the Civic Hybrid is, there's no infrastructure change in your life. You don't have to figure out how to adjust things things so that you can, if you drive long distances, plug in on those drives. You don't have to build anything at your house, in order to charge an electric car. And so this gives you a lot of the benefits, the quick acceleration and the practicality. A lot of EVs are hatchbacks without some of those drawbacks. Now, a lot of people are willing to take on those drawbacks, but ultimately, for those who aren't, cars like the Toyota Prius and this Civic are pretty appealing cars. Now, obviously, this isn't any sort of luxury car. You don't have, crazy noise deadening cancellation of this perfect smooth ride, but you have pretty much what you'd expect from a car at this price point, which, by the way, is a lot less expensive than the average new car, and yet it delivers a lot of very nice benefits like good technology and excellent fuel economy and surprisingly decent acceleration. The average new car is becoming more and more appealing, and this car does a great job of proving just how good of a vehicle you can get at a relatively affordable price tag. What I would say about this car is, again, it's no excitement machine. It's not something crazy or cool looking or anybody's going to turn their heads. And even though the acceleration time is pretty impressive, and indeed it is surprisingly quick, you're not really thinking about a car that's like fun or fast. It just is a relatively docile car that happens to be a little on the quick side. But what it does deliver is just like a good overall experience in a pretty impressive way. The ride quality is fine, the interior quality is fine, the technology is good. Like, this is a very inoffensive car that checks a lot of boxes and checks them well. And every time I get in a car like this, I am continually impressed with just how good cars like this are becoming. And I always think to myself, if I could get away with just having a car like this, this would be a great daily driver, usable, simple, practical car that you could get 10 years out of. If I was the type of person who wasn't like obsessed with getting like a cool and special car, this would be a really, really, really nice one to have. And I've always felt that way about some of the hybrid Hondas, like the Accord Hybrid and the CR-V Hybrid. They're just all around good. Drilling down to some of the more detailed points, the ride quality, again, is fine. It's exactly what I would expect from a compact car in 2024-25. It's not particularly cushy or comfortable, but it's totally reasonable and it's fine. It certainly will not beat you up, and it's certainly not too harsh. Steering and handling also predictable, easy, sort of similar, like nothing crazy or exciting to write home about, but like totally acceptable. Again, won't light your hair on fire going around corners on a racetrack, but it's fine. And I really do think that's sort of the story of this car. It does everything pretty well. It's just a really great car at a $35,000 price point, and you really got to hand it to Honda for creating something and just giving you kind of so much value in one vehicle. I like the Civic in general, but I especially like the Civic Hybrid. And if I were getting a Civic as like a regular commuter car, a non-Type R or SI, it would definitely be the Hybrid. You get incredible fuel economy and pretty good everything else. And it's just generally a surprisingly excellent car. And so that's the new 2025 Honda Civic Hybrid. This is a surprisingly good little car with surprisingly strong acceleration and a lot of other excellent benefits. And frankly, I think this is the Honda Civic that most people should get. And now it's time to give the new Civic Hybrid a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 47 out of 100, which puts the Civic Hybrid here against some close rivals and relevant cars. The Civic Si just edges it out in the DougScore, but that's because the DougScore is intended to be biased towards performance cars. Even then, it only wins by a single point. The Civic Hybrid really is a fantastic car and a great all-rounder with good technology, good interior space, excellent fuel economy, and even surprisingly strong performance. It would be a complete no-brainer purchase if it wasn't for the new Toyota Prius, which is also excellent, but either car is a strong buy and a good choice.